The Parts Availability Myth, Part 1. Today we're going to talk about parts availability for newer Mercedes, Classic Mercedes, and Youngtimer Mercedes. And so Part 1 of this video series is going to focus on why you might be surprised with parts availability on modern, we'll say like starting in the mid-90s and later Mercedes versus Mercedes from the 70s and going into the 80s and where some of the challenges are. So I am going to tell you guys something that's going to blow your mind. Parts availability for modern Mercedes that are between 30 and 20 years old is really bad, and parts availability for Mercedes made prior to 1972 is really good. And we're talking about genuine Mercedes parts. Now people look at me and they go, "You must be joking," but I'm not. And to highlight it, if I need a set of subframe mounts for the front subframe for a W111 or 112 or 108, I can readily get them from Febby and I can readily get them from Mercedes. Now there's some quality control issues with the Mercedes ones that we might talk about in a later video, but the point is it's very easy to get them. The Febby ones are actually high quality parts that are supposedly made in Germany, in case you guys were wondering. Now on the other hand, if I want a set of rear subframe mounts for a 201 or a 124, I have to settle for Chinese-made Limforder mounts. I can't get decent German-made mounts. These mounts were also used on the 202. They were used on all of the late 124 cars. So they were used up to 1995. I mean, this is just ridiculous, don't you think? I think it's ridiculous, but this is just one example. Here's some other examples of parts you can't get. If I have an R-Class and I want a climate control module, they're not available either. If I need to buy a wiring harness for a US market E320, they're not available either. If I need to purchase lower control arms for said E320, or differential mounting bushings, you know, the ones that always collapse that are mounted at the back of the diff, they're not available either. Why can't I get that stuff? Meanwhile, if I need a set of axle bearings for a 111, or I want a set of, it's another good example, an axle boot, lower diff mount, upper diff mount, all that stuff, spring pads, rear springs, all of that's available too. And if I want a rebuilt hydraulic compensator, I can get that. But if I want a pair of rear hydraulic struts for like a 560 SEL or SEC for the self-leveling suspension, I can't get those. So this is the quandary. Now, Mercedes parts support really starts to get weird when you get into certain model lines. So the W116, of course, is not as well supported as the 108, even though the 116 is a modern car. The 126 has better support than the 116, but you can argue that the 126 does not have quite as good part support as a W108, where if I need a motor mount kit for something like a 6-cylinder 280 SE, an early one, I can get that. If I need a motor mount kit for a later 6-cylinder 280 SE, I can't get them through Mercedes, but you know, I can get all of the 126 engine mounts. The problems begin when I try to get a guide rod mounting kit, part number 123 330 1475, or rear subframe mounting kits. Certain ones are not available. Or if I want, what's another good item? For the longest time on the 126, we couldn't get lower control arm bushings. Or in a more critical area, if I want an evaporator for a 126, I have to settle for a tie unit that's made by Bear. And if I want an expansion valve, I have to settle for a Chinese unit that's made by Egelhoff, but still Chinese. And if I want a rear wheel bearing kit, well, good luck. Some of the parts aren't always available for the 126 or the 123. So I think the takeaway from this video is that there's no clear-cut line where parts availability is going to be great. Some people think they could buy a car like a 140 where parts are just rapidly disappearing, especially for the S600, because they were so complicated to make when new. Now, part of my theory about why some of these older cars, these pre-72 swing axle Mercedes, have better parts availability than the later cars, is because the parts themselves were not that complex to build. Materials quality was more important, but it's going to be much easier to build a tubular lower diff mount than it is, say, a brake pump or a brake master cylinder with a pressure regulator on it that's electronically controlled like you'd need for an SL600. Some of the parts availability questions can also be answered by looking at the market for those parts. People ordered tons of stuff for 280SLs and 280SL suspension components, engine components, braking system components, steering components, you know, you name it. A lot of those are the same as the Mercedes passenger cars. But then when you start getting into cars like the W210 and the W140 and the R129, there's not a lot of interchangeability between those cars. There's some, but not tons of it. And that's where I think the parts availability gets stifled and trips over itself. So we're going to go into part 2 next, but before we wrap this video up, please like, share, subscribe, tap the bell for notifications. And if you have any secret information about buying Mercedes parts, like the keys for the R129 series that you can't get anymore, leave it in the comments below and share it so that we can get the information out there. Thank you so much. Enjoy watching the channel, and if you have a classic Mercedes, welcome to the greatest YouTube channel on earth.